12 Ronnies podcast with me, Jake Shaw. 12ronnies.com helps inventors and innovators to connect with entrepreneurs and investors to create commercial teams and then get their products or services to market successfully. To find out more information, go to www.12ronnies.com and our LinkedIn groups listed below. Today I'm talking to the CEO of Crowd for Angels, Andrew Adcock, about his journey as an entrepreneur, how Crowd for Angels works, solid advice for innovators on how to make the best possible pitch proposal, future growth sectors, cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. Andrew is in a big boardroom with all the sounds of busy London in the background, but you can still hear him clearly. Andrew, could you start by introducing yourself and tell me a bit about your life up till now?
Certainly, Jake. So I'm Andrew Adcock, and the current CEO of Crowd for Angels is a regulated crowdfunding platform in London. I founded my first company whilst in university. It was a student review site, and it was to basically say that Westminster University was terrible, but do it in a way that I could generate a profit. Whilst in university, I raised £50,000 for that company. That was my first ever fundraise. And that company failed, which was a shame, but that was 2 years later. I then went into social media and was building private social networks for large companies like Nokia. And I finally ended up at Crowd for Angels with the director of 9010. That was the company who built the social media companies then. And that's been the story since. So 2014 I joined. That was the first time I'd sort of gone into the fundraising business, if you will, and trying to help entrepreneurs raise money. And I've been doing it ever since and enjoying it. Stressful, but enjoying it.
One of the things that I've been talking to a lot of people about is the ability to come up with an idea, create a commercial team, but obviously the important third leg to that stool of idea, commercial team is money, is investment. So Crowd for Angels is doing a lot of stuff quite differently, aren't you?
Yeah, we are fundamentally a crowdfunding platform, so we allow any good business to put in an application and try and raise capital on our platform. But we do look at it slightly differently. So first of all, I was an entrepreneur. I know how much help people need. So we always invite them into the office and we do a lot of what I class as pro bono work to just help them get pitch ready, if you will. And then when we look to raise the money, we're not just looking at guys around the table or individuals in the local area or the crowd that they know. We also look a little bit further afield, so we'll go to investors in China, Japan, Australia, etc., and invite them to the deal as well. And we try and just give it a big oomph. Any fundraising is going to be difficult, so as long as you have a big enough crowd, you'll get there. But you need a lot of patience, time, and just, drive.
Can you give me an ideal scenario? In fact, why don't I try? I met a guy a couple of years back. He's an ex-aircraft engineer, and he wrote a book about how to get to space cheaply. And he's even designed a space plane that has got an air-breathing rocket engine on it. I said, how much would it cost? He said, £250,000. Let's say we've got him. How would you go about funding somebody like him?
Well, first of all, I think that's a fantastic story. So that helps a lot. I'd also say £250,000 for a rocket engine that's air breathing is fairly cheap. So yeah. the numbers might need to be looked at there. But let's just break that down. So first of all, he's got a great story. He's trying to do something different. He's trying to conquer something that people imagine of, and he wants to capture that imagination. The first port I would start at is creating a video or at least an illustration of the rocket and what he's trying to achieve. The video is always better because as an entrepreneur, you not only show the product, but you're also showing yourself. And that's quite endearing to investors. But as well, investors want to know who's behind the project, can they trust them, etc. So a faceless campaign won't do as well as a campaign with a face. Now, once we've got that story curated and we've got a video in production, we then have to look at the documentation. What's the business plan saying? Does it stack up? As I mentioned immediately, £250,000 to go to space with an air-breathing rocket is probably not enough money, and lots of investors would ask that as well. So can he quantify it? How does he quantify it? Does he need more money in the future? What is the £250,000 being spent on? These are some of the basic questions any investor or any sort of normal person will ask, because if they're going to give £100, £1,000, even £10,000 to a campaign, they want to know that the product that they're investing in will get there. So looking at the documentation is always going to be important. And then I think the third thing, and this is going to be a bit counterintuitive, but I would always pass your pitch to a family relative, preferably somebody older, and ask them to have a look at the information that you've wrote and see if they get an idea, if they understand what you're selling, why you're selling it. I always call it the mother test, just because if you give a pitch to your mother and if she understands it, and you can see from her face if she's lying or not, then you're in a good place. If she doesn't understand it, look at what you've wrote. Can you simplify it? Use plain English. Don't start using acronyms and assuming people understand, because 99 times out of 100, people do not understand exactly what you're saying. So you have to be very simple in the language, very simple in the communication, and use images, videos to help explain an idea.
I used to film pitch sessions which are based on Dragon's Den. And I remember that on one occasion we had a panel which was a property developer, somebody who made a chunk of change out of double glazing, a lady who ran a chain of beautician parlours, and I think there was an estate agent in there, or property developer as well. And pitching to that Dragon's Den panel, a Russian engineer and scientist who had created a battery with 75 times the life of a normal battery. He went out in front of this panel and explained he had this battery. It absolutely blanked him. They were not interested in him at all. The next one who came out was a lady who was a florist. She told them how she wanted to franchise her floristry business, and she told them a story about herself. She was a nice, affable, well-presented lady, and she had some pictures of happy people with flowers and things like that, and they invested in her. I've always thought about this. It's like, well, they understood her proposition because they've all bought flowers for their mothers, whereas Russian guy coming out saying it's a really good battery didn't quite cut it with a property developer, a double glazing guy, etc., etc. So is there something that you do where you're actually targeting an investment opportunity to people, or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand who your audience is. I mean, Crowd for Angels predominantly is males of the age of around 47, 48. I mean, there's always a few under 30 and a few over 70. But if you take your sort of 90% of the audience, you're then going to look for products that suit that audience. So if you took the example you just had, the battery and the florist, actually the florist would be difficult on something like Crowd for Angels, because the investors might not see it as a scalable business. They might not think as flowers as a big profit margins, etc. Whereas with the battery, they're at that age where their children have left home or due to leave home. They've made their wealth through 30 years of working, and they want to take a punt on something that is a little bit different and could be high risk, high reward. They might then consider the battery opportunity, because here's a battery that's going to, in most terms, revolutionize the battery industry. It's going to dominate. It's 75 times longer lasting, so customers don't have to purchase as many. And it could really have an impact. That would probably be more suitable for a platform like us. When we get pitches, we only accept 7% of companies. The other 93%, we don't just simply turn them down and say, have a good day. I mean, we do try and put them somewhere. So that might be on another crowdfunding platform, and we do have contacts at, Cedars, Syndicate Room, etc. But it also might just be giving them some friendly advice and telling them, you're not ready yet, or you should go to here, or you should speak to your bank. There's cheaper sources of finance. And I would hope that, generally speaking, in the UK, we have a fairly communal sort of style of financing whereby people, if they're not in the right place, get a bit of information to get them to the right place. And that's just, and maybe it's the British way, maybe it's our sort of sensibility mindset, but I think that's important. I think, it's also having a look at what opportunities are correct for the person at that time.
I speak to lots of VCs doing this, but I spoke to a VC and I was talking about scale-ups and startups. She stopped me halfway through and she said, shall we talk about what I call a scale-up and what you call a scale-up? And I was talking about a greetings card business that needed an investment of a couple of million to scale into international markets and what have you. And she said, I talk in billions. And I was like, right, okay. And she said, you have to remember, in a lot of the investment community, they are massively risk averse and they will invest in property and commodities and very little else. And it's interesting what you're saying, Andrew, because you're the other end of the scale. You're talking about stuff that's not run-of-the-mill and not basic. You're actually talking about stuff that's quite challenging. So what do you say about that?
Honestly, there is an appetite for what we call high-risk, high-rewards projects. I had a call earlier today, and the gentleman on that call, an investor actually, who was talking about one of the pitches on the platform at the moment, was saying, well, we need something a little bit more risk-focused, something that could provide, a difference in the market, not just another, well, he called it an e-commerce platform. So there is an appetite there. I mean, ultimately, to have innovation in the world, you need a source of finance that's going to back these projects. You never got the first Tesla car without Elon Musk putting $1 billion into the platform, and you didn't get the first sort of rocket engines without NASA again putting billions of dollars into going to space in the first place. So there needs to be some way of funding these projects. And unfortunately, I guess the traditional sources of finance, your sort of banks, your VCs, they are now risk averse because they have reputation to manage. They have to look after their investors. They have to look after governance. They have to think about what the wider press will think of them. So this gap, if you will, has then been filled by crowdfunding platforms and other platforms. I know we had the boom in crypto back in 2017 and 2018. And we are seeing, I guess, community-led investments into risk projects that capture people's imagination. The downfall, of course, is that lots of people don't understand what really happens with capital. And if we go back to the gentleman with the rocket engine that was air breathable, we both said £250,000 is probably not enough. But that's not to say it wouldn't capture other people's imaginations. It's just, if he did raise the capital, would he be able to deliver? And if the answer is a high probability of no, then it damages the reputation for him, the investors, etc. So it's trying to come up with a happy medium whereby you have a bit of a gatekeeper, like a crowdfunding platform that sieves through these projects and makes them a little bit more reasonable. And on the other hand, you have the entrepreneurs and the investors that can come together and fund innovation, because that's what we need. We need innovation. The UK can't carry on making socks. We have to fund innovation, and we need a method to do that. And so this is a happy medium, I think, with crowdfunding.
You've led on to my next question, which is, what is your view of the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years in innovation and industry and business in general in the UK and the world?
Obviously, there's different markets, and if we look to places like Asia, China, India, etc., we are seeing them move into high-level tech, which at the moment the UK does very well. Obviously, there's a conversation going on about how well that tech has been developed and is there holes, etc. Huawei being one of these conversational points. But in the UK, there's been sort of two movements. I mean, the first has been back to traditional production. So I mentioned socks. Actually, the production of the socks in UK has gone up, but they are high quality socks. They are made of the finest fabrics, and they are small numbers. It's just a case of we are reproducing quality rather than quantity. But the main move that I think we'll see, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, is, innovation topics like biotech, meditech, fintech. If we look at fintech alone, the large market dominators at the moment, Monzo, Revolut, etc., they're not only dominating here in the UK, but they're also starting to dominate out in the EU and the US. Transfer-wise, that's recently been valued at something like 4 billion. So we are seeing this level of tech not only integrate into the UK economy, but really push ahead into the world as a whole, and this connection becoming forwards. But certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, I think people should be looking at the meditech field and the biotech fields very carefully, because there's a lot of money being pumped in by universities and individuals into these university programs to revolutionize healthcare. And that's not just healthcare on the blockchain and, making it a more democratic process, if you will. It's the fundamentals, looking for cures, looking at new drugs, looking at how we can get over Parkinson's, etc. And I think that's really interesting because people are focused on it.
It's fascinating as an area. I mean, I worked on a project digitising Harley Street. The crowdsourcing of knowledge and things like that means that we can actually be coming up with solutions globally. Which brings me on to the subject of cryptocurrencies and blockchain, which is another part of your business.
Absolutely, yes.
What effect do you think that's going to have? Because I'm a bit of an evangelist of blockchain and smart contracts and things like that, but every time I meet blockchain specialists, they say it's going to take 5 years and it will need to be an industry-wide change. What do you think about that?
I'd probably disagree with that last part about it needs to just be industry. We've seen a lot of development with the small community that's there at the moment. From a crowdfunding point of view, we got into crypto and blockchain for a very simple reason. We had an investor from Australia. He wanted to invest £100 into a company. He'd done a bank transfer. It cost him £15 to do that transfer, so the investment was £85. Unfortunately, the investment didn't go through. We refunded the money to him. By the time it landed in his account, he'd been charged again £15. So by the time he'd done a simple transaction, he had £70 remaining. And I think it's madness. We're a connected world. Banks can talk together. It was £100. Why would you charge him £30? It's sort of hyperinflation or hyperinterest, if you will. That same transaction, actually, we did on the blockchain about a year later. Another individual wanted to put £100 into a company. It cost him the equivalent, and this was with the third-party services working, etc., the equivalent of about £2.70. Now, I know that sounds large, but when you compare that to £30 or £2.70, you can really see the power of blockchain. And since then, the prices have started coming down. There's more and more service providers that are trying to do things. For us as a platform, what we want to see is more, automation, if you will. So when somebody registers on a platform, they go through the KYC process, that's Know Your Customer, identity check. They already have a record from somewhere else. They don't have to complete a Crowd for Angels form. They simply digitally import. Then they go to the investment. They want to invest. So they send, £100, £1,000, whatever it is, and that stays in a stable coin. Again, the costs are tiny. It's not expensive to run the service, it's not expensive to the investor, and it's not expensive to the company. Once the company's hit its target, it raises its capital, it withdraws the crypto, and it issues a digital token that represents the share certificate. So then the investor always has a copy of his or her ownership, and the company receives its funds. Now, that whole transaction path might cost 1 or 2%, if you could refine the process. At the moment, most companies, when they're raising money, spend anywhere from sort of 6% to 15%. So you're making a huge reduction in the cost of finance. And I think that's really important. But you've also made it trustless. You didn't have to have all these sort of intermediaries holding bits of paper or keeping data on an Excel spreadsheet or in a database. You've stored it somewhere that's trustless. People can see the information. Okay, it's private information, so they won't be able to see who owns that, but they know it's there. And I think what's going to be really exciting is when governments start picking up that data. I mean, Companies House in the UK has been fairly forward-thinking. They have an API, they have all the documentation in the public domain. It's only going to be a matter of time before they start allowing companies to post data to them directly, and therefore, when we have a transfer of shares or a raising of funds, rather than having this 4 to 6 week process or logging in and filling all details, you're just going to pump the data in. 5 minutes later, it's done. And there's a record. You know how many shares the company has issued. You know how much money they've raised. You know who owns what. I think that's going to be really interesting. And I think for finance, the finance industry as a whole, it's going to just wipe barriers. If you're in Australia, if you're in Japan and you want to invest in a UK company because you like it, you can do it. And it's going to be the same way across the other way.
Where do people find you, Andrew? If I'm an investor, where do I go?
Crowdforangels.com.
And if I'm looking for investment in my idea?
You still go to crowdforangels.com, but if you want to reach out to me directly, just andrew@crowdforangels.com. Say hello. I usually answer my emails till 11 p.m. at night, so you'll always get hold of me.
And finally, one statement for each. What's one solid bit of advice that somebody can take away from you today that will help them move on for an investor and for somebody looking for investment?
I focus on a clear and concise story. Nothing long, nothing too short, just a very simple introduction to you and your business.
And for an investor?
For an investor, think about the amount you invest and consider what you would be able to achieve with the money the company seeks.
Andrew Adcock from Crowd for Angels, thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please sign up to 12ronnies.com and subscribe to our groups and YouTube channel so you never miss a podcast from 12ronnies.com.